Todd Monken just made a move that caught everyone off guard. The head coach of the Cleveland Browns didn't schedule a press conference. He didn't drop some carefully worded statement designed to soften the blow. He didn't play the political game. Instead, he did something most coaches are too cautious to attempt. He walked into his own building, looked at the media access situation, and said no. Not "we'll evaluate," not "let's take this day by day," not "I hear your concerns." Just no. He locked the doors on Shedeur Sanders' training sessions completely. No cameras. No reporters leaning over fences trying to decode every incomplete pass like it's some national emergency. No notebooks scribbling down who looked tired during stretches. No sideline whispers between practice reps. Just locked doors, football, and one very clear message from Monkin. If you came looking for drama, if you came looking for storylines, if you came looking for the next viral clip, you picked the wrong building. And before anyone jumps to conclusions about Monkin overreacting or getting emotional about nothing, hold on. Because once you see everything that's been building behind the scenes in Cleveland, this doesn't look reckless. It looks absolutely necessary. In fact, once you connect the dots and understand what's been happening to his young quarterback, you realize Monkin didn't just make the right decision. He may have made the only decision left. Here's where things started heating up, and it all began with a timeline that makes absolutely no sense if you think about it logically. Just 3 days into voluntary minicamp. Not 3 weeks. Not halfway through camp when quarterbacks have actually had time to build rhythm with their receivers. Not after preseason games where you can see how guys actually perform under pressure. 3 days. That's the window we're talking about here. 3 days of optional workouts where the stakes are low and the evaluation should have been non-existent. Think about what's actually happening on day 3 of voluntary minicamp. Players are still learning which locker has their gear. Some guys are still trying to remember where the meeting rooms are without getting lost in the facility. Receivers and quarterbacks are probably still figuring out each other's cadences, still getting the timing right on basic routes, still shaking off the rust from being away from football for months. The coaching staff is still installing fundamentals. Everyone's basically in introduction mode. The coffee machines probably still smell new. Installation is happening. Development is happening. Learning is happening. But actual meaningful evaluation? That's not really supposed to be happening yet. And yet, somehow, the Cleveland Browns quarterback battle was already being decided in the media narrative before any real competition had even started. Mary Kay Cabot, a longtime Browns beat reporter with significant influence in Cleveland media circles, came out with confidence and pushed one very specific idea. Deshaun Watson was already the more likely starter over Shedeur Sanders. That's the story she chose to tell. That's what she put out into the world. At that point in the off-season calendar, Shedeur hadn't even been given enough time to shake off the rust from being away from football during the off-season. He hadn't built timing with his receivers. He hadn't learned the nuances of the route combinations Monkin wanted to run. He hadn't demonstrated anything one way or another because he hadn't been given the opportunity to demonstrate anything. Nobody had real data yet. Everyone was basically still in the introduction phase. Quarterbacks were still learning signals. Receivers were still adjusting to footwork. The entire offense was in that phase where you're building blocks, not evaluating final products. But the narrative was already being framed like it was basically decided. Like the race was already over before it really started. Like someone had already determined the outcome before the competitors had actually competed. That's not analysis. That's not honest football evaluation. That's not what journalism is supposed to look like. That's something else entirely. That's planting a narrative before the race even starts. That's deciding the outcome before the competitors have actually had a chance to prove themselves. That's building a predetermined conclusion and then searching for evidence to support it instead of gathering evidence and letting the conclusion follow naturally. And Monkin noticed, because coaches hear everything. They may act like they don't pay attention to what's being written or said about their team and their players. They may shrug it off in public during press conferences. They may pretend that outside noise doesn't matter. But trust me, nothing flies under a coach's radar, especially not when it involves the most important position in professional sports. Coaches are hyper-aware of what's being said about their quarterbacks. They know what the national narratives are. They understand what local media is pushing. They hear the whispers. They see the headlines. They know exactly what's being constructed. So when Monkin saw this narrative being built on day 3 of voluntary minicamp, When he watched someone with a platform push a predetermined conclusion before any real evaluation could happen, he understood what was coming. He could see the trajectory. He could predict where this story was headed if it went unchecked. And that awareness, that understanding of what these narratives do to young players and young quarterback rooms, that's what set everything in motion. Here's the part that separates this from just another sports media story that you can dismiss and move on from. This wasn't just about one opinion piece that appeared in one publication. This wasn't about one article or one hot take that someone threw out on social media one morning. This wasn't about a single reporter's perspective that you could read and then forget about by the afternoon. This was about what those words, when repeated over and over, when amplified across platforms, when discussed in locker rooms and homes and across social media, can actually do inside a professional football facility. People who have never been inside an NFL building, people who watch football from home on Sunday afternoons, they don't always understand this dynamic. But quarterback rooms are delicate ecosystems. They operate on a specific kind of chemistry. They function on trust. They require a particular kind of environment to develop properly. And when you introduce external noise into that environment, when you let narratives seep in from outside the building, when you allow predetermined conclusions to shape how players and coaches interact, you fundamentally change how that room operates. One headline can shift confidence. Think about that. One story, told the right way, presented by the right person, can change how a quarterback feels about himself. It can change how he approaches practice. It can change how he prepares. It can change whether he's thinking about his mechanics or thinking about what the media is saying about him. One media story about who's winning a quarterback battle can create whispers. Players talk. They hear things. They talk to their teammates. They talk to their families. Information spreads. And suddenly what was said publicly becomes internal conversation. One comment from an anonymous source, and these happen all the time, reporters always have league sources, and people in the building, can turn honest competition into politics overnight. It can create an us versus them dynamic. It can make young players paranoid about what's being said about them. Quarterbacks are sensitive to this stuff because they have to be. Their brains are wired differently than other positions. They're reading defenses in real time. They're processing information at lightning speed. They're making split-second decisions under pressure with defensive linemen trying to knock their heads off. Their minds are working on overload constantly. So when external noise starts creeping in, when they're hearing stories about themselves through teammates, through family members who saw something on social media, through coaches who are aware of the narratives, it adds a layer of pressure that has nothing to do with football. It's psychological weight that shouldn't be there. Monkin saw exactly where this was headed. He watched the trajectory forming in real time. He understood that if this narrative kept building unchecked, if it was allowed to grow and spread and become part of the conversation around his quarterbacks, the quarterback room wouldn't be a place of honest competition anymore. It would become a place of politics. It would become a place where Shedeur Sanders was fighting multiple battles simultaneously. He'd be fighting to learn the system, fighting to build chemistry with receivers, fighting to understand NFL coverage schemes, fighting to develop as a professional. And on top of all that, he'd be fighting the media narrative. He'd be fighting predetermined conclusions. He'd be fighting stories about whether he was the starter. That's too many battles for one young player. And instead of letting that noise grow unchecked, instead of hoping it would just go away on its own with time, instead of assuming that good play on the field would automatically overcome negative media narratives, Monkin stepped in fast. He recognized the pattern. He understood the trajectory. He knew where it was headed. And he decided that he wasn't going to let his quarterback navigate that minefield alone. He was going to protect the environment first. He was going to shield his player. He was going to create the conditions necessary for real development to happen. His first move was direct. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't hidden behind corporate speak or coaching cliches. It was honest and straightforward and exactly what needed to happen at that moment. He went on a podcast and addressed the quarterback competition head-on. No dancing around questions. No fake coach speak designed to avoid saying anything real. No, we'll evaluate everything day by day nonsense that sounds good in the moment, but tells you absolutely nothing about what's actually happening. No, we have a lot of good players, generic answer. No deflecting to talking about other teams or other situations. Instead, Monkin looked straight at the situation and made it crystal clear. There is no predetermined starter. Nobody has the job locked up. No favorite, no secret handshake, no front office golden ticket that's going to hand someone the position without them earning it. No hidden hierarchy where the decision was made months ago and nobody told the player. That's not how this was going to work. The depth chart would move as competition moved. It would shift based on performance. It would change based on what he was seeing on the field during actual practices, during actual evaluations, during actual competition. His final decision would come when he had real football evidence, not social media takes, not talk show debates, not media pressure, not what reporters were saying, not what national pundits were claiming. Real football evidence. Think about how important that statement was. Think about what it communicated to everyone listening. It communicated that Monkin wasn't going to be influenced by external narratives. It communicated that he was in control of the process, and the process wasn't being controlled by media coverage or public opinion. It communicated that the evaluation of his quarterbacks was going to be based on what they actually did on the field, not on what people were saying about them. It communicated that he recognized there was narrative building happening, and he was rejecting it completely. That was move number one. That was him going on record. That was him making a public statement that drew a line in the sand. He was saying to the media, to the fans, to everyone watching, I see what you're doing. I'm aware of the narrative, and I'm not participating in it. He was putting everyone on notice that the quarterback evaluation was going to happen according to his timeline and his standards, not according to what made for good television or what generated clicks on websites. But here's what's important to understand. A statement alone isn't enough. Coaches talk every single day. The NFL is full of press conferences. It's full of polished answers. It's full of phrases like, we're evaluating everything and everybody's competing. Coaches say things all the time. They make statements. They answer questions, but then nothing changes. The environment stays the same. The noise keeps happening. The narratives keep building. That's why move number 2 was so powerful. That's why what happened next actually mattered. Because Monkin didn't just talk. He followed up his words with action. He backed his statement up with an actual change in how the building operated. He wasn't just going to say there's no predetermined starter and then let the media continue building narratives. He wasn't going to make a statement on a podcast and then let reporters camp outside the facility gathering information and creating stories. He was going to actually change the environment. He was going to actually protect the process. He was going to actually shut down the noise machine. And that's when things got real. Then came move number 2. He shut the doors, not metaphorically. Actually, physically, locked doors, no media access. And that's when Cleveland's media world started to panic. Because suddenly those same reporters who felt comfortable building narratives from the outside were now standing on the outside. Literally standing outside the facility with no access to what was happening inside. No practice access. No training footage smuggled out to social media accounts. No watching footwork drills through the fence trying to decode what's happening. No standing on the sidelines trying to turn every missed slant route into a quarterback controversy. No timing receivers coming off the line. No analyzing arm angles during warm-ups. No casual conversations with players or coaches where you might pick up information. No nothing, just locked doors. Inside the building, there was just players, coaches, film sessions, honest competition, and football. Nothing else. The noise from outside couldn't get in. The narratives couldn't build from inside the facility because nobody from inside the facility was feeding them information. The predetermined conclusions couldn't shape how things worked because nobody was standing around watching and then going out and telling people what they saw. And honestly, that's exactly what this situation needed. It's exactly what this quarterback room needed. It's exactly what Shedeur Sanders needed. But this decision didn't happen in a vacuum. This wasn't Todd Monken waking up one morning angry because of one article that rubbed him the wrong way. This wasn't an emotional reaction to one negative story. This was a decision built on an entire season of watching his young quarterback get attacked from outside the building. This was watching a quarterback who was drafted 5th overall, not in the 5th round, but 5th in the entire draft, one of the highest draft picks in professional football, get 0 first-team reps in training camp. Not limited reps. Not we're easing him in gradually. 0. Nothing. Not one real opportunity with the first unit to build chemistry, timing, trust, or rhythm with the receivers he was going to be throwing to. That's the kind of decision that sets the tone for an entire season. That's the kind of decision that shapes everything that comes after. And what's wild, what's absolutely stunning, is that the same local media voices who suddenly became deeply concerned about quarterback transparency and quarterback development barely made noise about that situation. Where were the front page questions then? Where were the hard-hitting segments asking why the 5th overall pick wasn't getting opportunities? Why wasn't anyone asking whether the organization was setting their young quarterback up for success? Why weren't there daily discussions about this? They were quiet, completely quiet. And you know why? Because that story didn't create easy controversy. That story didn't generate clicks. That story required accountability. That story made people uncomfortable. That story required looking at the organization and asking tough questions instead of looking at the young player and criticizing him. So instead of pursuing that story, instead of holding the organization responsible for how they were handling a major draft investment, the spotlight shifted to the easier target. The rookie, the young player, the guy with the least amount of power in the situation. It's easier to attack a player than it is to hold an organization accountable. It's easier to question a young guy than it is to question front office decisions, because the front office doesn't need your help to look good. But a young player, you can really take shots at him and get attention for it. And that's exactly what happened in Cleveland last season. They took the easy path. They built narratives around the young quarterback instead of investigating the organizational decisions. They created drama instead of seeking accountability. And Monkin watched it happen. He watched it build. He watched it compound week after week. And when the offseason came and he saw the same pattern starting to form again, just 3 days into minicamp, he decided that was enough. The doors were going to close. The media was going to lose access. And this quarterback room was going to be protected. But here's the thing that a lot of people who only focus on Cleveland don't fully understand. The noise didn't just come from local Cleveland media. The attacks didn't just come from reporters in Ohio. The criticism didn't just come from people covering the Browns day to day. It came from everywhere. It came from national voices. It came from people with massive platforms. It came from the kind of attention that echoes across the entire sports world. Rex Ryan went on national television and absolutely unloaded on Shedeur. Ryan, who's been a defensive coordinator, who's been a head coach in this league, who has decades of experience in professional football, sat on live television and claimed that Shedeur wasn't doing enough to get on the field, that he wasn't fighting hard enough for opportunities, that he needed to be more aggressive in demanding reps, that the effort wasn't there. That somehow, a rookie quarterback who hadn't even been given first-team reps, a young player who hadn't been handed real opportunities, was responsible for not being on the field enough. That's where a lot of people around the league started raising eyebrows. Because think about that situation for a second and think about how illogical it actually is. A veteran football personality, someone with decades of experience in this game, sat on live television and criticized a rookie quarterback who hadn't even been given first-team reps to prove himself. He hadn't been handed the tools he needed to demonstrate his ability. He was being criticized for not succeeding at something he hadn't been allowed to attempt. That's like blaming a chef for making bad dinner when nobody let him into the kitchen. That's like criticizing someone's driving when they've never been allowed to get behind the wheel. How do you evaluate a quarterback's readiness when he hasn't even been handed real opportunities? How do you question preparation when the opportunity itself never came? How do you judge someone's toughness or competitiveness when they're not being asked to prove it? And then came Tony Grossi, another national voice with a platform, another personality with reach and influence. When Shedeur mentioned he was dealing with arm soreness, something that happens across football at every single level, at every position, especially quarterbacks adjusting to throwing loads, adjusting to NFL-level repetition, adjusting to the mechanics and demands of professional football, Grossi didn't treat it like normal football news. He didn't nod and move on. He mocked him, on air. He questioned his toughness. He questioned his commitment. He questioned whether he really wanted to be a starting quarterback. He basically framed it like a quarterback who hadn't even been given consistent reps, who hadn't been given real opportunities to work, somehow didn't earn the right to feel sore from the work he was doing. Think about how upside down that logic really is. Think about what he was actually saying. If you're working hard, if you're trying to earn opportunities, if you're pushing yourself in practice trying to improve, your arm gets sore. That's not weakness. That's effort. That's a young guy pushing himself. That's a professional athlete putting in the work. That's exactly what you want to see. But instead of understanding that, instead of recognizing that he's a young professional adjusting to a new system and new demands, the narrative became about character, about toughness, about whether he really wanted it, about whether he had the mental makeup for the position. And once media conversations start shifting from performance to character, that's when things inside a locker room can get dangerous fast. That's when you're not just questioning someone's play. You're questioning who they are. But here's where the real damage happened. It wasn't just one article or one comment from one national voice. It wasn't just Rex Ryan saying something harsh or Tony Grossi mocking arm soreness. It was something much more methodical than that. It was something more deliberate. It was a systematic approach to building a narrative. Mary Kay Cabot kept building something in the background, and piece by piece, article by article, headline by headline, week after week, a bigger narrative started taking shape. It was like watching a structure being built brick by brick, but the structure being built was designed to tear someone down. Stories kept coming. Questions about discipline. Questions about attitude. Questions about leadership. Words like undisciplined. Words like self-focused. Words like immature. Words designed to stick in people's heads long after the article ends. Words designed to create a certain image in people's minds about who Shedeur Sanders was as a person and as a player. And at the same time, another quarterback kept getting pushed into the conversation. Dillon Gabriel. Again and again and again. The public kept hearing versions of the same message. Maybe Gabriel's the safer option. Maybe Gabriel deserves more reps. Maybe the Browns made the wrong decision. Maybe the rookie isn't ready. Maybe we should look at other solutions. And here's how narrative building actually works. It's not the same as reporting. It's not honest journalism. It's a specific technique. It's not one giant headline that changes everything. It's not one massive attack that knocks somebody down. It's much more subtle than that. It's much more deliberate. It's brick by brick, day by day. Little comments here, podcast clips there, practice observations, anonymous whispers, social media clips, radio takes, panel debates. And before you know it, the public thinks they're watching honest football analysis when really they're watching a storyline being constructed in real time. The repetition becomes the truth. The number of times something is said starts to matter more than whether it's actually true. The frequency becomes the evidence. That's how it works. You don't make a big accusation. You make small observations. You ask questions instead of making statements. You report what sources say instead of what you actually know. You create doubt. You plant seeds. You let other people water those seeds. You wait for the narrative to grow on its own. You watch as people start repeating the story because they've heard it so many times. You see it spread across social media. You see it become conventional wisdom. Nobody really stops to ask whether it's true. They just accept it because it's been said so many times. And in Cleveland, that's exactly what happened. Mary Kay built something week by week. She reported observations. She asked questions. She cited sources. She added context that made everything look worse. And other people started amplifying the message. National voices started picking it up. Social media started spreading it. And suddenly the narrative wasn't just something Mary Kay was reporting. It was something the entire sports world was discussing. That's the power of systematic narrative building. That's why Monkin understood what was happening. That's why he recognized where it was headed. He wasn't just reacting to one story. He was reacting to a full season of watching this exact technique be deployed against his quarterback. He was watching a methodology. He was understanding a pattern. And when that pattern started to emerge again in year 2, when he saw the same reporter starting to build the same kind of narrative, he made a decision. This was going to stop. Not today, not next week. Now, immediately, the doors were closing. But here's what a lot of people missed while focusing on Shedeur and the narratives being built about him. Here's what got glossed over. Here's what didn't get the attention it deserved. Think about what he actually walked into when he got drafted. The Cleveland Browns spent the 5th overall pick on him. That's not a late-round flyer. That's not a backup project. That's not a project quarterback you're developing for the future. That's franchise-level investment. That's the kind of draft capital that organizations protect like gold. When you spend a 5th overall pick on a player, you're saying that player is important to your future. You're investing significant resources. You're making a statement about what you believe in. And then what happened? They gave him 0 first-team reps in training camp. 0, not limited reps. Not we're easing him in, not he'll get his shot later. 0, nothing. Not one real opportunity with the first unit. Not one chance to build chemistry with the receivers he was supposedly going to be throwing to. Not one moment to understand the timing and rhythm that's required at this level. They gave him practice squad reps. They gave him developmental time. But they didn't give him the first team reps that would allow him to actually prove himself. And the same local media voices, who suddenly became so concerned about transparency and quarterback development, barely made noise about that. Not where it mattered. Not in a way that held the organization accountable. They didn't demand explanations. They didn't ask the organization why they were investing that heavily in a player and then not giving him real opportunities to prove himself. They didn't run investigative pieces about organizational decision-making. They didn't hold press conferences. They didn't ask hard questions. They were quiet, completely quiet. And you know what? That silence is revealing. That silence tells you something. Why? Because questioning the organization requires more work. Because holding an NFL front office accountable is harder than attacking a young player. Because a front office doesn't trend the same way a rookie does. An internal development problem doesn't generate nearly as much chaos or clicks as a bold headline questioning whether a young quarterback has what it takes. An organization's decision-making process is abstract. It's not as visual. It's not as easy to create drama around, but a young quarterback who's struggling, that's concrete. That's something you can point at. That's something you can build a narrative around. And in Cleveland, that difference became impossible to ignore. The easy story was criticizing Shedeur. The harder story, the one that required real journalism, the one that required holding powerful people accountable, the one that required doing actual work, would have been asking why the organization wasn't giving him opportunities. Why invest in a player and then not utilize him? Why draft someone 5th overall and then treat him like a late-round project? Why not give the young quarterback a chance to prove himself? Why are you seemingly setting him up to fail by not giving him the platform he needs to succeed? So they picked the easy story. They attacked the young player instead. They built narratives around him instead of investigating the organizational decisions. And that's what made Monkin so angry. That's what made him understand what was happening. That's what made him recognize that the media wasn't interested in fairness or accuracy or holding the organization accountable. They were interested in creating drama. They were interested in building narratives that would drive engagement. They were interested in finding targets they could attack. And once he understood that, once he watched that play out for an entire season, he made a decision about how things were going to be different going forward. Then came the offseason. It should have been a chance to reset. A fresh start. A new camp. A clean slate. A new competition where everyone starts from 0 and proves themselves based on what they do during the evaluation period. That's what an offseason is supposed to be. A chance to wipe the board clean. A chance to start over. That's what it should have been. But that's not what happened. Just 3 days into voluntary minicamp, we're talking about 3 days of optional workouts here, 3 days before anyone had really settled in, 3 days before the installation was even complete. Mary Kay was right back at it. Right back into the narrative building. Already pushing the idea that Deshaun Watson looked like the more likely starter over Shedeur Sanders. Not after training camp when players have actually had time to work together. Not after preseason games where you can actually see how guys perform against real opponents, where the stakes are higher, where there's actual competition happening. Not after joint practices with other teams where you're seeing your players against different defensive looks. Not after real competition where the stakes are high and the evaluation matters. 3 days of optional workouts. Think about the timeline. 3 days. At that point, some receivers are still learning each other's cadence. The communication between quarterback and receiver is still developing. Some quarterbacks are still figuring out the wristband signals, which routes are which, how the play calling works, what the verbiage means. Some rookies are still trying not to park in the coach's reserved spot because they don't know where they're supposed to park. Some players are still finding the locker room. Installation is still happening. The offense is still being taught. Nobody has really proven anything one way or another. And somehow the quarterback race was already being framed like it had momentum, like it had a direction, like it had a predetermined outcome. That's when Monkin finally looked around, saw exactly where the story was heading, and said enough, because he's been here before. He watched this play out for an entire season. He watched a narrative get built brick by brick. He watched the quarterback room get disrupted by external noise. He watched a young player have to deal with being attacked while also trying to learn a new system. He understood exactly what was happening when he saw Mary Kay's story 3 days into camp. He could predict where this was going to go. He could see the pattern forming. He could recognize the methodology being deployed. And he understood that if he didn't change something immediately, he'd spend another season watching his young quarterback fight battles that had nothing to do with football, nothing to do with learning a system, nothing to do with actual quarterback development. He'd spend another season watching narratives being built. He'd spend another season watching predetermined conclusions being presented as analysis. He'd spend another season watching media narratives disrupt his building process. That's when something clicked in him. That's when he went from thinking about how to manage the media narrative to deciding that the media narrative wasn't going to exist anymore. He went from hoping that good work on the field would overcome negative media coverage to taking steps to ensure that negative media coverage couldn't happen because there would be no media access at all. He went from trying to work within the system to changing the system entirely. And that's what separates a good coach from a great coach. A good coach learns to manage external noise. A great coach eliminates the source of the noise. A good coach tries to shield his player while still playing the media game. A great coach says the media game isn't being played here. Monkin crossed over into that second category when he made the decision to lock the doors. What Monkin clearly understands, and what a lot of people outside the building still miss, what fans watching on television don't necessarily grasp, what analysts talking on ESPN don't always factor in, is this fundamental truth about quarterback development. Young quarterbacks don't develop in chaos. They don't grow while dodging headlines every morning. They don't sharpen their mechanics while hearing their character questioned every week. That's not how human development works. That's not how learning works. That's not how athletic development works. Think about what happens when you're trying to learn something complex. You need focus. You need mental energy directed toward the task at hand. Every distraction costs you something. Every interruption pulls your attention away. Every external noise eats up mental bandwidth that you need for the actual learning process. And quarterbacks need to concentrate at an incredibly high level. They need to process information quickly. They need to make decisions rapidly. They need to maintain focus while dealing with pressure. That requires mental clarity. That requires an environment where they can work. Quarterbacks need reps. First of all, that's number one. They need to throw the football. They need to work with receivers. They need to build timing. They need to understand their own mechanics. They need repetition. That's how learning happens. That's how skills develop. That's how muscle memory forms. You don't become good at something by not doing it. You don't improve by sitting on the sidelines. You improve through work. But they also need trust. They need to know that if they make a mistake, if they throw an interception, if they miss a throw, it's not going to be dissected on social media by a million people who have never thrown a football at this level. They need to know that their coaches have their back. They need to know that there's an environment where failure is part of development, not a crime. They need to know that they can push themselves without feeling like every mistake is going to be turned into a national conversation. They need honest competition, not a predetermined outcome, not a narrative that's been decided before the competition starts. Real competition where everyone's evaluated fairly based on what they actually do on the field, where the best player wins the job, where politics don't matter, where media narratives don't matter, just performance, just merit, just execution, just film. And above all, they need room to breathe. They need space. They need mental room to work. They need freedom from the constant scrutiny of people trying to turn every moment into a story. They need to be able to practice without wondering what camera angle is being captured. They need to be able to have a bad practice without it becoming a breaking news story. They need to be able to throw an interception without it being clipped and shared on social media. They need to be able to grow without feeling like the entire world is watching and waiting for them to fail. That's exactly what Todd Monken protected when he shut those doors. That's what he created when he locked the media out. He created an environment where Shedeur Sanders could focus on the actual work of becoming an NFL quarterback instead of spending mental energy managing narratives. Every manufactured controversy costs something. Every headline designed to stir reactions, every clipped quote taken out of context, every league sources say, conversation built before the facts are even in, it all costs something real. And in football, that cost usually gets paid by players. Because while fans scroll through social media and debate and argue online about what they saw, inside that building, somebody still has to show up at 6 a.m., they still have to grab the iPad. They still have to hit the film room. They still have to study coverages, clean up footwork, fix timing, understand reads, improve progressions, and get better. They can't use the excuse that they were distracted by media narratives. They have to produce. And when that player is a young quarterback like Shedeur Sanders, the pressure multiplies exponentially. Because quarterbacks don't just play football, they carry the temperature of the entire building. When a quarterback struggles, everyone notices. When a quarterback succeeds, the entire offense gets better. The quarterback is the most visible position on the field. Everything flows through that position. So when you add extra pressure, when you add narrative distraction, when you add media noise, it affects not just the quarterback but the entire offense. After watching Shedeur Sanders deal with that environment for an entire season, dealing with it while simultaneously trying to learn an NFL system that's far more complex than anything he'd encountered at the college level, still trying to earn trust in the locker room with players who don't know him, still studying protections and defensive schemes, still building chemistry with receivers he'd just met, still surviving the speed of pro football, which is dramatically faster than college football. Todd Monken reached a conclusion, not a maybe. Not a we'll monitor the situation and see how things develop. Not a we'll assess things as we go. A real conclusion. A definitive conclusion. If this quarterback was going to grow, if he was going to develop into the player Monkin believed he could be, if he was going to have a chance to succeed in professional football, the environment had to change. The environment that surrounded him, the world he was operating in, the conditions he was working under, those had to change. Because here's what Monkin knows that casual fans sometimes forget, that people who played football at lower levels might not fully understand. Talent alone doesn't develop quarterbacks. It's necessary, but it's not sufficient. Arm strength doesn't develop quarterbacks. Yes, you need arm talent. Yes, you need the ability to throw the football with velocity and accuracy. But arm strength alone doesn't make a quarterback. Highlight throws don't develop quarterbacks. You can have beautiful throws on Instagram. You can have highlight reel moments that look incredible. But those don't translate into sustained success. 5-star recruiting ratings don't develop quarterbacks. You can be the most decorated prospect in the country, but that doesn't guarantee anything at the professional level. What develops quarterbacks? Environment. The conditions they work in. The support system around them. The trust they feel. The freedom they have to make mistakes and learn from them. The mental clarity they can maintain while learning. The ability to focus on improvement without external distractions. The stability of knowing their job is being evaluated fairly based on performance, not on media narratives or public opinion or predetermined conclusions. Monkin finally decided protecting that environment mattered more than protecting media access. That's a huge difference. That's a fundamental shift in approach, because in today's NFL, access is everything to reporters and media outlets. Reporters want clips. They want video of practice. They want footage they can use to create stories. Networks want storylines. They need content. They need things to talk about. They need drama. Social media wants moments. It wants viral clips. It wants something that will get shared and discussed and debated. Everybody's looking for the next 5-second video that can explode by lunchtime. A missed throw, a frustrated helmet toss, a coach yelling during drills, anything that can be clipped, reposted, debated, and turned into breaking analysis. Monkin saw exactly where that cycle was headed. He understood the machine. He knew how it worked, and he shut it down. He didn't gradually reduce access. He didn't compromise. He didn't try to maintain some relationships while limiting others. He shut it down completely. No cameras hunting for that one awkward angle. No zoom lenses waiting for a frustrated facial expression. No notebook scribbling down every incomplete pass like it's some front-page emergency. No reporters hovering on the edge of drills looking for body language issues. Nothing, just football. Just quarterbacks, receivers, coaches, whiteboards, playbooks, corrections, timing reps, film sessions, and honest competition. That's it. That's what's in the facility now. Not the circus, not the noise, not the cameras and the narratives and the story building. Just the work, just the process, just the fundamental task of developing a quarterback. And honestly, that's what real leadership looks like. That's what separates talking about something from actually doing something about it. Anybody can stand behind a podium and say, "We believe in our guy." That's easy. Anybody can smile into a microphone and talk about trust, development, and patience. That part is simple. Coaches do that all the time. It's part of the job description. Every coach says they believe in their players. Every head coach talks about patience and development. It's what you're supposed to say. The hard part, and this is what separates good coaches from great coaches, actually doing something when your player needs protection. Actually making a decision that might upset powerful voices in the media. Actually closing the door when you know people are going to criticize you for it. Actually taking action instead of just talking. That's the hard part. That's what requires real conviction. That's what requires courage. Monkin did that. He didn't just talk, he acted. He didn't just hope things would get better. He created the conditions for things to get better. He went on that podcast, looked straight into the conversation, made eye contact metaphorically with everyone listening, and made one thing crystal clear. There is no predetermined starter. No favorites. No politics. No locker room popularity contest. No media-built hierarchy determining who gets chances. This quarterback battle would be decided one way and one way only: performance, merit, execution, film. What actually happens on the field, that's it. Nothing else matters. But here's the part that made it real. He backed his words up. Because coaches talk every single day. The NFL is full of press conferences. It's full of polished answers. It's full of phrases like, "We're evaluating everything and everybody's competing." Coaches say things constantly. The building is full of talk, but talk is cheap. Talk is easy. Monkin, he actually built the environment where those words could mean something real. That's different. That's a fundamental difference. Now when Shedeur Sanders steps onto that practice field, he's not wondering what tomorrow's headline will be if he misses a dig route. He's not scrolling through his phone at night, wondering what people are saying about him on Twitter. He's not worried about what national talking heads are saying. He's not concerned that a bad practice is going to turn into a news story. He's not wondering whether somebody's going to clip his warm-up throw and call it arm fatigue. He's not wondering whether another national talking head is about to question his attitude because of one camera angle. He's not managing narratives. He's not defending himself publicly. He's not fighting battles off the field. Now he can just work. He can focus on what matters. He can concentrate on improvement. He can study film and work on mechanics. He can throw the football and build chemistry with receivers. He can learn the system without distractions. He can grow without noise. He can develop without interference. And Monkin clearly knows what he already has in his quarterback. He's not confused about it. He's not uncertain. He's seen the arm talent, the ability to throw the football accurately and with velocity. He's seen the confidence, the poise, the ability to stand in the pocket under pressure. He's seen the ability to stand in tough pockets, take criticism, keep showing up, and keep working even when the noise around him kept getting louder. He's seen all of that. But maybe more importantly, Monkin has seen the resilience. Because talent gets drafted. Resilience keeps you in the league. Resilience is what separates the guys who make it from the guys who don't. After everything Shedeur Sanders had to navigate last season, limited opportunities, constant public criticism, media storylines built before he even got a real shot, outside pressure from every direction, questions about his character, questions about his toughness, questions about whether he really wanted it, he never stopped showing up. He never quit. That matters to coaches. That matters to locker rooms. That matters to organizations. So now Monkin's mission is simple and clear. Build the wall, protect the room, guard the process. Give his quarterback the one thing he probably hasn't had enough of yet: peace, space, freedom to prepare, freedom to work, freedom to grow without interference. Todd Monken didn't shut the media out because he's afraid of criticism. He didn't do it because he's hiding something. He didn't do it because he can't handle scrutiny or tough questions about his decisions. He's a professional coach who's been in this league a long time. He understands criticism. He understands that people are going to question your decisions. That's part of the job. You make a call, someone's going to second guess it. You bench a player, someone's going to ask why. You hire a coach, someone's going to wonder if it was the right move. That's the nature of professional sports. Criticism is part of the environment. He did it because he watched too many people with access spend an entire season proving they couldn't handle that access responsibly. He watched them have the privilege of being inside the building, of having information, of having platforms to communicate with the world. and he watched them use that access irresponsibly. He watched them use it to build narratives instead of report facts. He watched them use it to attack a young player instead of hold an organization accountable. He watched them use it to create drama instead of provide insight. And he decided that had to stop. Not eventually, not sometime. Now. At this point, Todd Monken's message couldn't be any clearer if he wrote it across the practice field in giant letters. He believes in Shedeur Sanders, not halfway, not we'll see how camp goes and then make a decision, not he has potential and will develop it. Not one of those polished coach answers that sound nice for 5 seconds and mean absolutely nothing by the next news cycle. Real belief. The kind of belief that doesn't live in press conferences. The kind of belief that doesn't show up in empty quotes to reporters. The kind of belief that actually changes decisions. The kind of belief that locks doors and tells the world, you don't get to mess with this process anymore. Because when Monkin looked at everything that happened last season, the headlines, the noise, the constant criticism, the endless hot takes, the camera clips hunting for drama, the character shots at a young player, the quarterback debates built before reps were even earned, the predetermined conclusions presented as analysis. He didn't just shrug and say, that's football. That's how it is. You can't change it. He looked at all of it and decided if this quarterback was going to grow, the environment around him had to grow too. If this young man was going to have a real chance, the conditions had to be different. If he was going to develop into what Monkin believes he can become, the noise had to stop. That's leadership. That's real leadership. That's accountability. That's a coach saying, if you're going to attack my quarterback every time he breathes, every time he has a bad practice, every time his arm is sore, every time he misses a throw, you're not getting front row seats to the process anymore. That's drawing a line. That's saying this is how it's going to be. And honestly, after everything people watched unfold last season, after seeing how the narrative was built, after understanding what happened to a young player who was just trying to learn and develop, after recognizing the unfair treatment and the predetermined conclusions and the character attacks, can you really blame him? Can you really argue that he made the wrong decision? Can you really say that protecting his quarterback was inappropriate? Because this was never just about practice access. This wasn't about who gets to stand by the sidelines with a notebook. This wasn't about cameras getting footage of warm-ups or reporters timing 3-step drops for analysis. This wasn't about whether reporters could capture video of drills. This was about trust. And once trust gets broken inside an NFL building, once the people inside the facility realize that the people with access aren't using it responsibly, once you understand that your access is being weaponized against your players, getting that trust back is harder than converting 3rd and long against a disguised blitz package. It's nearly impossible. It requires rebuilding. It requires time. It requires proof that things have changed. Monkin clearly saw enough. And now the people on the outside can write whatever they want. They can speculate whatever they want. They can debate whatever they want. But one thing's changed. One fundamental thing is different. They won't be doing it from inside that building anymore. And now we get to the part that makes this whole story bigger than just the Cleveland Browns. Because honestly, this isn't only about Cleveland anymore. This isn't only about one coach, one quarterback, one media room, or one training camp. This is about a much bigger question happening all across the NFL right now. It's about a conversation that nobody really wants to have, but everyone should be thinking about. How much access should media have when that access keeps turning into distraction? When coverage stops being coverage and starts becoming narrative building? When opinions start shaping public perception before competition even plays out? When headlines start affecting player confidence before young guys even get a real shot? When the tools meant to inform become tools meant to manipulate? Where exactly should teams draw the line? Where's the boundary between openness and protection? Where's the point where you say enough is enough? And Todd Monken just drew his line loud and clear. He said, here, right here, no further. He said that protecting his player was going to take priority over maintaining good relationships with media. He said that the well-being of his quarterback was more important than access. He said that the process mattered more than the narrative, and now other coaches are watching. Other teams are watching. The entire NFL is watching to see how this plays out. Is Monkin going to face consequences? Is the media going to retaliate? Are other teams going to follow his lead? Is this going to become a trend? Is this going to change how organizations manage their relationship with media? These are the questions being asked. These are the implications of what Monkin did, because what he did was reject the current system. He said the way things are being done isn't acceptable. He said the power dynamic where media has nearly unlimited access and uses that access to build narratives isn't going to work for him. He said if you're not going to use access responsibly, you don't get access. That's a powerful statement. That's a shift. That's different from how most organizations handle things. Most teams try to manage the relationship. They try to give reporters some access while controlling what they see. They try to spin the narrative without blocking it completely. They try to work within the system. Monkin said no to all of that. He said, we're not playing that game here. This facility is off limits. The process is protected. The narrative doesn't happen. And that leads to the real question that almost nobody in football circles seems comfortable saying out loud. If Cleveland's media had covered Shedeur Sanders with even half the fairness, balance, and objectivity their job is supposed to demand, would this situation even exist right now? If they had treated a young player with some basic respect while still being critical when criticism was warranted. If they had investigated organizational decisions instead of just attacking the young guy. If they had used their platform responsibly. If they had earned their access by demonstrating they deserved it. Would Todd Monken have ever needed to lock those doors? Would this conversation even be happening? That's the real debate. That's what should be discussed. Not whether Monken overreacted, but whether the media earned the reaction they got. Not whether coaches should have this kind of power, but whether media has been responsible in how they use their access. Not whether blocking the doors is reasonable, but whether media narratives have become unreasonable. The responsibility here might not be on Monken. The responsibility might be on the people who had access and used it irresponsibly. The responsibility might be on the system that prioritizes drama over accuracy. The responsibility might be on the culture that rewards controversy over fairness. So now, it's the world's turn to react. Now it's time to see whether this becomes a trend or just an isolated incident. Now it's time to find out what this move actually costs Monkin and his organization.